Hi, I'm Andy Selman, the CEO of One Sherpa, and we're back today talking about George and his journey through life. And of course, where we left George yesterday was that George had times of happiness and he also had times of sadness. And one of the things that George didn't quite understand was how all his pieces came together. So on his journey today, we're going to show you where we've come from in the last couple of days and bring all this together so that George has got some context to his world. So if we go back and think about George, of course had bought some capital and like everybody else didn't quite have the money to pay for it all, and so he'd gone out and he had borrowed money from the bank, which we call debt, and of course he'd put a little bit of his own money in there, and we call that equity. So here he had gone, he had in fact bought his home, he'd bought a car, he'd bought an investment property, he'd accessed the equity in his home, which had given him some more debt, and he thought that might have made him happy. Then we traced through and what was happening with him in his income world. And so George, as if you can remember, George was working well, he was happy in his job because he really enjoyed doing that. The thing that made him a little bit unhappy was the fact that no matter how hard he tried, he always seemed to have a whole bunch of expenses. And of course, this was the bills that just seemed to keep coming and coming and coming, and that had made him a little sad. When he had worked with himself and maybe done a bit of budgeting, he was, however, able to give himself a bit of choice. And we call this net income. So both he was happy at this stage, and of course his family was happy. And of course that gave them the choices to do things that they'd always wished. One of the choices that they'd made, of course, was that bringing that down on the bottom here, it gave them the choice to accumulate things. And that, of course, if you remember, came in this box here. And the pace at which they accumulated it, either they used their income to buy this capital, or they used the bank's money to do that. We call this net cash flow. So this is where we were on the first session, this is where we were on the second session. And of course, one of the things that George was looking for is, well, I know where I am, I do all of this kind of working hard, but I wonder where I'm going to end up. And of course, where he's going to end up, we can draw on the end here. We can draw this in the same way. And of course, the equity. And so now you see this thing looks a little bit like a fence, doesn't it? This, of course, is a post. This, of course, are two rails. And this, of course, is another post. There are all sorts of ways of describing this, because the two posts give you the context to what you're doing. So another way of saying it, this is what you've got, this is what you've got, and this is how you got there. This is the kind of thing that George was looking for, because he wasn't looking just to work and never get anywhere. But somehow he needed to connect everything up. And so the way that this connects up, of course, is when you accumulate capital, it ends up here. When you pay for things yourself, it ends up here. And when you use the bank, you end up there. Well, one of the things that George had realised is that if he had all of this debt on board, he wasn't really wealthy. In fact, he felt like an imposter. In fact, he knew he was an imposter because he thought that if I've got all of this stuff, I'll be wealthy. And there are a whole bunch of people out there who look really wealthy because what we all look at is what they have, not how they paid for it. An interesting thought, of course, would be that if every car had a debt equity indicator, we might find that a lot of the cars driving around on the roads don't belong to the people driving them. They actually belong to a finance company. What we might find if there was a debt equity indicator on every letterbox, a lot of the houses in this nation actually belong to the bank. They don't actually belong to the person who's got their name written on the title. And so this debt equity thing, there is another term that goes around. It's called 80% loan to value ratio. What that means is that a bank will lend you up to 80% of the value of that home, of that investment property. Another way of saying that, of course, is that you would have 4 parts debt for every 1 part of equity. So 80% loan to value ratio means that you, if you are borrowing on that basis, have got $4 of debt for every $1 of equity. And expressed in those terms, it sounds like a very different picture. In fact, George had realised that. George had realised that in accessing the equity in his home, he was not getting any further ahead. And I guess the net thing for George, after all of this journey was, he realised that he needed some education. He realised that things weren't quite as simple as he thought they were. And he realised that if he didn't get to understand all of this, then he really wouldn't know where his money was going. He wouldn't know where it had gone, where it was going, how he could chart his way to a better life. And as a result, he needed to find out in his own world what was happening and where his money was going. Thanks very much.